On a hot, dry Thursday morning in late October of 1981, in the dust-glazed dooryard of a 240-acre cotton and soybean place in Bolivar County, Mississippi, 8 miles northwest of Cleveland, on the delta about a half-mile north of the small wood-frame Greer Chapel AME Church. A 34-year-old farmer named Marcus Greer stood in his last clean Western shirt and watched a man from the Cleveland Federal Land Bank Association nail a printed yellow notice to the door of the sound guard cab of his brand-new 1976 John Deere 463 turbocharged diesel. The notice was a chattel foreclosure. It covered, by name and serial number, the 1976 John Deere 4630, the Valley Industries Center Pivot Irrigation System on the South Quarter, a 1976 John Deere 7700 combine, a 1977 John Deere 2-row cotton picker, 3 Butler grain bins, a Ford F-150 pickup, and the deed to the 240-acre South Quarter of the Greer family place. The man from the FLBA was a 36-year-old loan recovery officer named Harlan Webb. He had attended Delta State University in Cleveland with Marcus Greer in 1965. He apologized twice. Then he nailed the notice to the cab door, climbed into a tan FLBA-issued Plymouth Fury, and drove the gravel road south toward Cleveland. Marcus Greer stood in his own driveway for a long time after the Plymouth was gone. The brassy, humid Delta sky was the color of unfired clay. He did not move. He did not go inside. What Marcus Greer had paid no attention to across the previous 5 years, while the 4630 and the center pivot and the new cotton picker had been rolling onto the South Quarter on Federal Land Bank credit at rates that had climbed from 8.25% in 1976 to 17% by 1981, was the single sentence of advice his father, Reverend Elias Greer, had given him in the parlor of the Greer farmhouse on the day of the will and deed signing in the spring of 1976. Reverend Eli Greer had said it quietly. He had said it once, and he had said it again at the bottom of the back porch in case it had not been heard the first time. He had said, "Son, no mortgage on the land." That morning, with the yellow notice flapping against the sound guard cab door of the 26,495 463. Oh, Marcus Greer was finally, fully listening. The Greer family place had been bought in the spring of 1903 by Marcus Greer's great-grandfather, Isaiah Greer, a 31-year-old Mississippi-born former Pullman porter who had purchased the original 80-acre core of the place for $240 in coined silver from the estate of a small white Delta cotton planter whose heirs had moved to Memphis. Isaiah Greer had cleared the heavier kudzu and gum tree timber on the back 40 himself with 1 mule and an axe and his oldest son, and had brought the first 80 acres into cotton by the spring of 1907. The place passed by direct father-to-son inheritance for 4 straight generations. Isaiah to his oldest son Joseph in 1936, Joseph to his oldest son Theodore in 1958. Theodore, Reverend Eli Greer's father, to his only son Elias in 1968. Reverend Eli Greer had been born in the front bedroom of the small wood-frame Greer farmhouse in 1912. He had inherited the farm in 1968 at the age of 56. He had farmed it for 13 straight years by the spring of 1976, alongside, the whole time, his unpaid weekly work as the lay Methodist preacher who took the pulpit at Greer Chapel AME every 4th Sunday, in the same small white clapboard church his great-grandfather Isaiah had helped build in 1908. Reverend Eli Greer had bought the 1952 John Deere Model R diesel, the first diesel tractor John Deere ever built, brand new from the John Deere dealer in Cleveland in March of 1952 for $3,650 cash, the entire profit of his 3 best post-war cotton years, saved careful dollar by careful dollar in a coffee can in the back of the bedroom closet. The Model R had been the first diesel tractor in Bolivar County to plow a Delta cotton row. Eli had been 40 years old. His father Theodore had been there at the dealership. In the entire 73-year history of the Greer place, across the boll weevil years of 1907 to 1915, the 1927 Mississippi flood, the 1930s Depression, the Second World War, the post-war recovery, the early 1960s civil rights years, and the early 1970s cotton price collapse, three things had stayed the same. The 1903 deed had stayed in one continuous chain of Greer ownership. The wood-frame 1903 farmhouse had not been substantially altered, and the family had never in any generation owed any bank 1 cent against the land, not in the flood, not in the Depression, not in any year of the 20th century. Reverend Eli Greer's father, Theodore, had said on the back porch of the same farmhouse in the autumn of 1932, in the worst year of the Depression, "Son, the only piece of land a man truly owns is the piece he owes nothing on. Hold to it." Eli Greer had held to it for 13 straight years from the day he inherited the place in 1968. In the spring of 1976, the Mississippi Delta was 3 years into the strongest cotton and soybean run since the early 1950s. Cotton, which had stood at 38 cents a pound in 1972, had climbed to 73 cents a pound by the autumn of 1975. Soybean prices had climbed even faster. Center pivot irrigation, which had been a Nebraska Sandhills technology in 1965, was, by 1975, the single fastest-growing capital expenditure on the entire Mississippi Delta. The Cleveland Federal Land Bank Association had grown by 143% in 3 years on agricultural irrigation lending alone. The John Deere dealer in Cleveland had a 12-week waiting list for the new 1976 turbocharged 4630 diesel. The Bolivar commercial in Cleveland carried in the spring of 1976 twice a week half-page advertisements from the FLBA with the headline, "Borrow against your Delta. Grow faster." The mid-70s are here. Reverend Eli Greer was 64 years old that spring. His wife, Pearl Greer, a small, bright Delta state-educated schoolteacher at Mound Bayou Elementary, had died of a sudden stroke in the kitchen of the farmhouse in 1973. Their only son, Marcus, was now 34, was married to a Mound Bayou teacher named Adelaide, had 2 small children, and was farming the home place alongside his father. And Reverend Eli Greer had decided, on a Sunday afternoon in February 1976, sitting at his own oak parlor table with a cup of black coffee and a small worn black leather pocket Bible open to Proverbs, that it was time. He drove down to the lawyer's office in Cleveland that Monday morning and signed a will and deed under which the south quarter of the Greer place, the 240 acres of better soil cotton ground at the south end of the home section, would pass directly to Marcus on signing, free and clear. Reverend Eli would keep for himself and for the rest of his life the north quarter, the small wood-frame farmhouse, the long cypress-board cotton and soybean storage barn, and the 1952 John Deere Model R diesel. At the parlor signing on the Saturday afternoon, with Marcus and his wife Adelaide at the table, Reverend Eli Greer said only one thing about money. He said, "Son, no mortgage on the land." He said it the way Methodist preachers in the Mississippi Delta say things. Once quiet, no emphasis on any one word. Adelaide Greer was pouring coffee at the sideboard. Marcus said, "Yes, sir." Because Marcus Greer, that Saturday in April 1976, was 34 years old, was sitting on 240 acres of his own ground for the first time in his life, was a college-educated farmer with a Delta State agricultural degree, and was already 3 pages into the John Deere 4630 brochure in his head. When Reverend Eli Greer held the back porch screen door open for his only son on the way out, he said it one more time. He did not raise his voice. He said, "Marcus, no mortgage on the land." Marcus said, "Yes, sir," again. He did not, that afternoon, hear it. By the second week of May, 1976, Marcus Greer was sitting at a clean desk in the air-conditioned office of the Cleveland Federal Land Bank Association, opposite a 41-year-old FLBA loan officer named Wendell Tarvin, signing his name to the bottom of a 16-page note for a brand-new 1976 John Deere 463. Zero turbocharged diesel, a Valley Industries center pivot irrigation system, the casing and pumping equipment for a new 400-foot irrigation well, and a 1976 John Deere 7700 combine. The total of the note was $42,860, financed over 6 years at 8.25%, secured against the deed to his South 240. Marcus put $1,400 cash on the desk, his last full year of seed cotton money, and signed for the remaining $41,460 against the land. Wendell Tarvin congratulated him. He shook his hand. He told him more than once that 1976 was, in his professional opinion at the FLBA, the best year to expand a Delta cotton operation that Bolivar County had seen since 1951. Marcus Greer drove the new green and yellow 4630 home that Saturday afternoon, slow up the gravel road, with the John Deere dealer's pendant flapping on the steering column. His father was at the cotton and soybean storage barn when he pulled in. Reverend Eli was sharpening a hoe on a small grindstone bench. Reverend Eli did not look up from the stone. He looked at the new tractor in the corner of his eye exactly once and went back to the stone. When Marcus climbed down from the cab of the 463, "Oh," Reverend Eli spoke without looking up. He said, "Marcus, did you mortgage the land for that?" Marcus said, bright and easy, "Yes, I did, Daddy." Reverend Eli Greer set the hoe down across the rail of the cotton and soybean storage barn bench, slow. He turned, slow, and looked at his only son for one long quiet count of 3. And then he said only this: "Then I haven't raised one of my boys right, and the Lord and your great-granddaddy Isaiah and I are sorry for it." He picked the hoe up again, and he went back to the stone. For the first 3 years, Reverend Eli Greer looked, on the surface, exactly wrong. The new 463 pulled the new center pivot, the new combine, the new cotton picker. Marcus farmed more acres faster. He hired 2 new hands from Mound Bayou. He took Adelaide and the children to a hotel in Memphis for the weekend after the 1976 harvest. He stood at the Delta Council annual meeting in Greenville in January 1977 and told Wendell Tarvin in front of the room, "Wendell, you were right. The mid-70s are here." But the mid-70s were already here, and they were here in a way Wendell Tarvin had not predicted. In October of 1979, the new chairman of the Federal Reserve, a man named Paul Volcker, raised the federal funds rate, fast and far, to break the inflation that the previous decade had baked into the American economy. The federal funds rate, which had stood at 5.25% in May of 1976, when Marcus had signed the note, rose to 11.5% by January 1980, to 15.5% by April 1980, to 20% by January 1981. Marcus Greer's 8.25% variable rate note at the Cleveland FLBA, which had carried a $7,640 annual debt service in 1976, carried a $14,210 annual debt service by 1980 and a $16,940 annual debt service by 1981. Cotton prices, which had stood at 73 cents a pound in November of 1975, slid to 58 in 1979, to 51 in 1980, and to 48 in 1981. Soybean prices fell harder. Diesel costs climbed. The Delta land value of irrigated cotton ground, which had been the only piece of collateral keeping Marcus's note above water, fell 31% between 1980 and 1981. The Cleveland FLBA wrote him 3 letters in the spring of 1981, 2 more in the summer, and a 6th in early October. The center pivot pump, which Marcus had financed an additional $8,300 onto a new short-term note in October 1980 when it had needed a deeper set replacement pump head, was by July 1981 running on a half-broken pressure gauge that he could not afford to repair. Wendell Tarvin was replaced in the autumn of 1980 by the younger loan recovery officer, Harlan Webb. Marcus renegotiated his operating line in the spring of 1981. He took a second mortgage on the South 240 in May. He sold the John Deere 7700 combine back to the dealer in August at a 41% loss. It was not enough. Reverend Eli Greer, in the dooryard of the small wood frame farmhouse at the north end of the home section, said nothing. He did not, in any of those 5 years, ever say the words, "I told you so." He did not say, "Remember what I said." He did not say one word in any direction about John Deere or about Valley Center Pivot or about iron or about debt or about Volcker. He worked his hoes. He kept his vegetable garden. He ran the 1952 John Deere Model R diesel on his own north quarter, in low gear, in second gear, on the 42 acres of dryland cotton he had kept in production through 1980 and 1981 by hand-picking the last cotton picker rows himself at 68 and 69 years old. He brought in 271 pounds an acre in 1980 and 248 in 1981. Small numbers by Delta irrigation standards, but enough by the standards of the small, careful operation he had been running since 1968 to pay his property tax and his Pearl Greer headstone fund and his rural electrification bill in cash every December in 20s out of a coffee can in the bedroom closet, exactly as his father Theodore had done in the Depression. He carried, in the left chest pocket of his pearl snap work shirt, the same small black leather pocket Bible his father Theodore had given him in 1932, and the books in that Bible, opened every fourth Sunday at Greer Chapel AME, continued all 5 years to balance. In the autumn of 1980, when Marcus came up to the old farmhouse one Sunday afternoon to ask for a $1,500 short-term loan, Reverend Eli did not lecture him. Reverend Eli went into the bedroom, came out with $1,500 in 20s from the coffee can in his closet, gave them to Marcus, and said only, "Pay me back when you can. No interest. We will speak no more of it tonight. Stay for supper. Adelaide and the children are welcome." He did not ask what the money was for. He did not have to. Marcus's hands, when he took the envelope, were shaking. The Greer equipment auction was held on a hot, brassy Saturday morning, the 7th of November, 1981, in the gravel and dust dooryard between Marcus's small brick tenant house and Reverend Eli's long cypress board storage barn. Marcus came out in a clean Western shirt and stood at the back of the crowd, hands in his pockets, hat low. Adelaide Greer did not come out of the house. Their 2 small children stayed with her. The 1976 John Deere 4630 went first. The regional auctioneer started the bidding at $12,000 and got it down to $7,700 inside 3 minutes. It sold at $8,050 to a cotton equipment dealer from Greenville. The cotton picker sold for $1,900. The center pivot pump head went next. The pickup sold for $710. The Butler bins went to a Cleveland grain operator for $1,500 each. By 4 o'clock, there was nothing in the dooryard except a square of cracked Delta loam where the 4630 had stood and a printed yellow FLBA notice nailed to the door of the small brick tenant house. Reverend Eli Greer stood at the auction for the full 3 hours, 2 rows behind his only son in a clean white pearl snap shirt and his sweat-stained pale cream straw farm hat. He said nothing to anyone. He did not bid on anything. He did not look at Marcus. When the crowd was breaking up, Reverend Eli walked across the dooryard to the porch of his son's tenant house, sat down on the top step, and waited. When Marcus came around the corner of the house with red eyes and his hands deep in his pockets, Reverend Eli stood up. He opened his arms. Marcus Greer walked into them, and for the better part of 2 minutes, in front of the empty cracked loam square where the 4630 had stood, he cried into his father's faded navy blue work shirt. Reverend Eli Greer did not say one word the entire time. When Marcus was done, Reverend Eli patted the back of his son's head, slow, twice. He said mildly, "Marcus, come up to the house for supper tonight. Bring Adelaide, bring the children. We will eat together. Tomorrow is the 4th Sunday. You will sit in the front pew. We will speak about what is next on Monday morning at the kitchen oilcloth, and not before. Marcus nodded. Reverend Eli turned and walked alone the half-mile north across the cracked Delta loam to his own small wood-frame farmhouse at the head of the section road, because Reverend Eli had given his old pickup to Marcus in the August of 1981 and had walked the half-mile back and forth between the houses every day since. The Cleveland FLBA put the South 240 on the market in the spring of 1982 at 38% of its 1976 appraised value. The buyer, after a long quiet conversation with Reverend Eli, was Reverend Eli Greer himself, paying in cash from the coffee can in the bedroom closet with a small 12-year note at 4% from a Methodist neighbor in Mound Bayou for the balance, the only loan Reverend Eli Greer ever signed in his life. By the spring of 1983, the original 480-acre Greer place was again under one ownership, debt-free except for the small 4% neighbor note. Marcus ran it as Reverend Eli's hired hand for the next 11 years for a fair cash wage. In 1992, Marcus took a job at the John Deere implement dealer in Cleveland, the same one that had sold him the 4630 in 1976, where he worked quietly and well as parts manager for the next 24 years. Adelaide kept teaching at Mound Bayou Elementary until 2004. Reverend Eli Greer lived another 14 years. He preached his last sermon at Greer Chapel AME on the fourth Sunday of August 1995. He died of pneumonia in his own bed in February of 1996, 84 years old, with the same small black leather pocket Bible on the bedside table, open to the book of Proverbs, the same passage his father Theodore had read to him in the autumn of 1932. He was buried beside Pearl in the small Greer Chapel Cemetery a half-mile down the gravel road. The headstone Marcus chose for him is plain Mississippi granite, with his name and his dates and one line beneath them. The line is from the book of Proverbs, chapter 22, verse 7. It reads, "The borrower is servant to the lender." The 1952 John Deere Model R diesel is still parked under the same long cypress board storage barn at the head of the section road, where it has stood since 1952. The farm is run today by Marcus's son, Reverend Isaiah Greer, who is 51 years old, who farms the same 480 acres debt-free, who has, since 2018, also taken the pulpit at Greer Chapel AME every fourth Sunday in his grandfather's place, and who has, taped to the dashboard of the Model R, the small yellowed piece of paper in his grandfather's careful pencil handwriting that reads, "No mortgage on the land. Pay your debts. Help your brother. Preach the fourth Sunday. Keep the R running." Daddy. Marcus Greer died of a heart attack in 2016 on a Saturday morning at the John Deere implement dealer in Cleveland, where he had worked for the better part of his second life. He was 74. His will, when his children read it, requested that he be buried beside his father and his mother in the small Greer Chapel Cemetery north of Mound Bayou. It also requested that his headstone be a plain Mississippi granite stone, with his name and his dates and one line beneath them. The line was the same line as on his father's headstone. It reads, "The borrower is servant to the lender." If this story stayed with you, there are more like it on this channel: Forgotten Machines, Quiet People, and the Work They Did. Subscribe and we'll tell you the next one.